there's nothing wrong with this image, but I want drama. So that's what we're going to work on today. We're going to use the same light setup, go from that first image to this image. Now I'm using the Godox AD400 Pro as my main light. This is on a remote head always. I like that unit down bottom because it acts as a sandbag. The XP400 is the remote head for the AD400. I'm using the 33.4-inch EasyLock softbox by Adorama. This is the proprietary mount for the AD300 and AD400. I love these things. They are so much smaller than the Bowens mount. They fold up so tight. They're almost as small as an umbrella, and they fit in my light stand bag. On the camera, I'm using the IT30 Pro as my remote and a fill flash. I set the on-camera flash to 1/128th power, and then I'll control the AD400 as well from that, with the remote option. It is adding a lot of light, believe it or not, even at 1/128th power, but I'll show you that later in the video. But I want to go through step by step through this to show you the process of getting from that first image to the dramatic image. Now I added the grid on this. Again, I'm getting ambient light from that LED, so you're not going to see just how controlled this light is with the grid on here, but I wanted to go again step by step so you can see it. You can see the backdrop is grayed out just a little bit more because of the grid, but it's still, whiter because of the LED. I'm at f2.2. The only way to combat this and get rid of that ambient light is, number one, to adjust my aperture and get rid of it that way. But then I'd have to boost the power on this. And I wanted to stay at 2.2 because I want fall off, even though it's just a straight white backdrop, I wanted fall off on this image because I didn't want to see any texture whatsoever because of where we're going with this to the final image, that dramatic image, which will all make sense as we're going through. So now we're going to shut off the LED in studio, and I'm just using the modeling light on the AD400 to light my subject. They did brighten this quite a bit on the version 2, but now look at on her right. You can see the shadow from the IT30 Pro, even at 1/128th power. It's putting enough light out to cast a shadow, which we have to get rid of. And I'm going to show you this too, moving the light in for the more dramatic look. So I'm going to turn it away from the backdrop as much as possible. The grid's going to control that light from hitting the backdrop. I'm still getting some because that's coming from the IT30 Pro. You can see the shadow from her and from the softbox. So I'm going to have to shut that IT30 Pro light off. I'm going to bring in the Lasso Light Halo. It's a Manfrotto Halo. This reflector is fantastic. It is perfectly flat all the time, but it takes time to set up. Now, look at the backdrop. The light is completely gone from it because of the angle of that, and that Lasso Light reflector is filling in the shadows perfectly for me on silver. I don't want a lot of fill. I can bring that in closer and add a lot more, but I didn't want it. Now, before you go out and buy this Manfrotto Halo reflector, it takes time to set up. It's not a pop-up, but it folds down so small and fits in a little bag. It actually fits in my camera bag. It's that small. But if you are going to complain about setup, do not buy this thing because it does take time to set up. I love it. It's the only one I use. I like this so much better than pop-up because it is perfectly flat and the light quality is fantastic. But again, if you're someone that complains about setup, that you need everything instant, don't buy it. Now, I still have the grid on for these one light photos. I switched to the X3 remote on these. The only reason I switched to the X3 is because I can control the modeling light from the X3. I couldn't figure out if I can control the modeling light from the IT30 Pro. And I was in the middle of the shoot. On the X3, it's right there. I can just touch the light and it shuts off, touch it and it comes on. On the IT30, it's not right there. If it is there at all, I don't know. I can't tell you that for a fact. But that's why I switched over to the X3 as the remote for the rest of the shoot. I just wanted to let you know that because, I did switch over. And I wasn't using the light anymore as a fill light because I'm using the reflector now. Again, control of this light is fantastic, but you can see I turned it so I can get some light on the left side of the image, on the left side of the backdrop, because I needed some separation. With all that light coming from the right side, The separation is not needed on the right side. But on the left side, I'm using the reflector to fill her in, but behind her, I would have lost her a little bit on that dark backdrop. So that reflector is acting as a hair light and a fill light. And then I'm turning the main light, the 8400 with the grid on it, a little bit more towards the backdrop. So I have that gradient and I have that depth and 3D look in the image. I love a gradient. If you didn't want it, you can turn the light just a little bit more and or move her further away from the backdrop. She's pretty close to the backdrop, maybe a foot and a half, 2 feet away. Well, 2 feet away. But if I wanted to get rid of that gradient, I would just move her closer to the camera, move her away from the backdrop just a little bit, and move that light away from the backdrop a little bit more. But again, I like the gradient. I want that look. So that's why I set it up that way. But with a grid, believe me, you can get rid of that completely just by turning it just a little bit more and adjusting your reflector to fill in just a little bit more. So remember that. You may shoot this completely different than I'm shooting it. It's completely up to you. But the only way to tell is to play with it. Again, this is all one light. It's fantastic. I love the look. I can add a backlight now just to, bring out that backdrop just a little bit more and give it a completely different look. And, for that, I would just use a speed light. And as a matter of fact, I'll show you that coming up because, it's a completely different look. It's still a 2 light setup that's simple. I use speed lights in the studio all the time as my second lights and third lights. I have an 8600, I have an 8400, I have the 8200s. But sometimes all I need is a little touch of light, whether it's a hair light, a rim light, or a backlight. The speed lights work fantastic. So you don't have to go into a heavy setup with many 8400s or 8600s. You can use just one main light, which is your heavy hitter, and then bring in a speed light for the rest of it. I just don't want you to have to spend the money if you don't need to. And I know a lot of people use multiple 8400s, 8600s, and 8200s. You really don't need it. And in the same sense, I can be shooting the 8200 as my main light with the softbox like this, with one of those mounts, the S2 thing, brackets or whatever. But I like this setup better. And I like the 8400 and 8600 because I can turn that power down and I'll get twice the battery life. Now, throughout this whole shoot, I left that modeling light on quite a bit throughout this because I know a lot of people said, that it just eats batteries, the 400. But I was down 1 bar at the end of this shoot with using the modeling light at full power throughout the shoot. So I think it did a pretty good job. Now, granted, I'm only at 1/4 power shooting on this, but that's all I needed. So, if I was shooting a commercial shoot and wanted that major depth of field, so I would put more power into the light, I would definitely pick the 8600 for that. But if you're not shooting, at 5.6 or f8 and not shooting commercially, the 8400 is going to do just fine for you. But I do love the power from the 8600 as well. The version 2, it's amazing. I'll do a video on that soon. Anyway, so I just wanted to show you what this light is doing. Now this here, this is the light without the grid. Again, there's nothing wrong with this. It's a good look, but it's just simple and plain to me. If I want to add drama, if I want to add a little bit more depth and more contrast to the image, I need to add that grid again. It's a good look. It's definitely serving the purpose. It's a nice light, but it's kind of boring. And, to combat boring, add a grid. That's my go-to every single time. Now, for me, again, I'm at 90% grid all the time, except if I'm shooting pure white and I want that really bright white look. Now look at the right side there. You can see that light, because of the softbox, you can see that direct light, the shadow from it because of the light placement. Again, I can move that back and that shadow would go away, but instead I'm going to add the grid. The grid is going to soften that light and give me more of a gradient on the left side. hitting the backdrop. It's a beautiful gradient coming off that. If you want to remove that light from that left side, again, just move it away, move her away from that backdrop just a little bit. That light will be gone off the backdrop completely. But again, I'm somebody that loves that gradient and loves that look. So now for the final one here, I'm adding 2 V flats just to remove the light from either side from bouncing everywhere and having more control on that. So this is a grid with the 2 V flats eating up that light from the sides. Does it need a reflector? Honestly, I don't think it does. But you can add one to fill, give a little bit more catch light in the eyes. That's fine. This is where I'm going to bring in the speed light. The speed light is definitely going to, give a little bit more separation from the backdrop and give a little bit more depth to the image. I have it set very low. I have that Magmod Magsphere on it just to, spread the light a little bit more evenly. If I want pure white, I'm going to pull her away from that backdrop and pull that light away a little bit more. It'll cover, have better coverage on the backdrop. But again, gradient, that's what I'm looking for, and that's what I go for. So I'm going to add the silver side reflector just to fill in from the bottom just a little bit. You can see the difference. You can definitely see it in their lower torso as well. It is definitely bringing more light into the image, but that's a matter of taste. Thanks for watching as always.